On episode 2 of The Kaufman Show, I welcome Jake Clemons to the CNS studios in Montreal, Quebec. He's best known as the saxophonist for Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, but Clemons is also an accomplished frontman and instrumentalist in his own right. We sat down last September for an intimate conversation about his new solo album, Eyes on the Horizon, and about staying positive in these troubling times. Also, Jake told us the most important piece of advice he's ever received. You're not going to want to miss it. Be sure to stick around until the end for a video taken at his most recent Montreal concert in October of 2019. So, Jake, I first got to listen to this album on September 11th, which was yesterday. And to have that mixed with the fanfare that I see on television. Mm-hmm. And I felt, I guess, maybe from the singles that came out from this, the Cohen song, the song with Morello, I've been waiting for this album. I've been waiting for a protest album in 2019. Yeah. I thought that, and I know you released it on the 6th, but there was something to me about listening to it on the 11th.
Man. I was thinking a lot about that yesterday. It's such a weird reality now. I mean, it's 2019, and the fact that there's voters in the next election that weren't born yet when 9/11 happened, and this, I imagine, will be some sense of detachment to what that day felt like. Obviously, if they weren't here for it, it's weird, man. Here's where my thought process went. I thought about that day. I thought about the feelings that I had. I thought about how that event had, it created a moment in people to band together, and how in the U.S. there's this notion of that we stand for each other, we fight for each other. That even if there's big inner bickering, that if somebody comes from the outside and tries to harm us, then we band together. It's been there for 200 years, that notion, right? So I thought about that a lot yesterday, and how this record speaks so much to the divisions that have taken place over the last several years, and how divided the country is, and my ambition to create some sense of unity, to focus in on that, and the significance of that, through music and not through warfare.
Which is, I mean, for many musicians, and I picture Guthrie's guitar with "This Machine Kills Fascists."
Yeah.
It must feel like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill.
This would be my first effort in that regard, so I don't quite feel like Sisyphus yet. But history may look at things that way. I don't know. I hope not. I hope we make progress, despite a few backsteps that may occur. Overall, when it comes to the heart of the people, I hope that ultimately we're making progress.
I've spent a lot of time in this series of podcasts with musicians and people in the music industry, branching out, a lot of it about politics. Spoke with John Kay from Steppenwolf, who so much of their catalog was about social change and injustice, mm-hmm. and may have even led to less spins on the radio because of it. Mm-hmm. He now dedicates his life to animals and to African elephants. Wow. and going into the bush to protect these animals. Wow. And that's his raison d'etre. Huh. I wondered and questioned him as to whether that was because he lost patience trying to do it for humans.
Yeah, interesting.
And I find it interesting that someone's got to pick up that mantle. People need to sing those songs, and they do inspire. And there must be something really... There must be a great honor to that, to be in that canon of people that are trying to evoke change.
Wow. I haven't really thought of it in the sense of the honor in it. I feel like maybe it's a matter of just people of a certain age. I've lived long enough to not be totally naive, and not so long to be completely jaded, right? And I know that the world is different today than it was when I was a kid. It feels different. And for me, I've always looked up to people that were able to write music that said something meaningful and spoke to the times and communicated something that would create some kind of a feeling towards action for the greater good. And I'd always felt myself at a loss of like what that would mean for me. It was I was more compelled to write songs about my brokenness or just the classic love scenario that we often fall into. And life's a lot more diverse than that. I've always wanted to find that voice, and the last couple of years have really just drawn something out of that in me to allow me to say what I really feel and what I think in a way that I hope connects.
I imagine that when you first heard Democracy, it must have really resonated with you. The Cohen version.
Yeah. To say it lightly, it resonated. That song kind of like it affected my core. I immediately reflected on how I grew up, being a young kid growing up on military bases, and just the sense of what patriotism meant as a kid. Patriotism meant celebrating the differences between us and knowing that they will not divide us. Patriotism meant that at the end of the day, no matter what differences we may have, that we are called to protect each other for the greater good. And there was a sense for me as a kid that patriotism wasn't even exclusive to your nation, right? There was like, as a kid in the U.S., again, growing up on military bases, that sense was like for anyone who identified with that kind of concept, that kind of mentality, that kind of view on society, that flag waved for them, So when I heard that song, it just, I don't know, it really caused me to reflect on those moments as a kid. And there's a lot of disillusionment in that song, and I feel it with a bite that would have been unfamiliar to me at the time had I heard it in 1992.
How old are you, Jake?
I'm 39.
Okay. So you're a year older than me. I imagine that our experiences of learning about America, and I grew up in Canada, but I've always been a real Americaphile. It's always been a huge thing for me. And it's the famous saying here, and I think it was a former premier of Ontario that said that living next to the U.S. is like sleeping next to an elephant. You never know when you're going to get stomped on.
Wow. Yeah.
And I always like when you guys sneeze, we catch a cold.
Yeah.
Never better exhibited than we see right now. We're coming up on an election in Canada, and the one that got all of us sick. And it's been hard to watch America. You talk to some people on extreme ends of the spectrum, and they say, "No, you didn't open your eyes before. This has always been America."
Yeah. There's aspects of that are true. However, my biggest qualm with where things are, in terms of what the country looks like, is that people have allowed these things to become political issues when politics are intended to be the tool to correct the issues, not the tool to create the issues and to divide. So when we talk about just fundamental things as humans that we can recognize as wrong, the questions about children being taken away from their parents at the Mexican-U.S. border, completely taken away from their parents, and then put in situations where they're dying, small children dying alone after being stripped from their parents. To me, this does not need to be a political conversation. What I would hope we can all agree on is that is not good, right? Is that's wrong. That's not something that we should hope for any human in any situation.
It's infuriating.
So there's a sense of of empathy that has been hidden, and yeah, again, my hope is that we just pull that veil back, and understand that we are together. For whatever the cause, whatever it is, we are here together. Yeah, I don't even know if that answers your question.
It does.
I'm rambling at this point.
That's okay, but I'm happy you brought up the camps, because it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about, that I can't understand when I think about growing up and hearing about Japanese internment.
Yeah.
And when I think about, I was just in D.C. I went to go see the Stones on July 3rd, or I think it was the 3rd or the 4th. Mm-hmm. And I needed to balance out the fact that I was going to do this really fun thing in this really fucked up place right now. Yeah. So I went to the Holocaust Museum. Mm-hmm. And it was really strange to walk through that museum and see all the parallels with the way that Muslims or Latin Americans or just Latinos are being demonized.
Yeah, yeah.
Hard to reconcile.
Yeah, I could take that a step further. I went to Nuremberg a couple of years ago on tour, and I really wanted to visit some museums while I was there, and there's some amazing museums there. But one that I'd walked into, I found exceptionally intriguing, because I grew up with a decent education and learning about all of the previous wars, certainly including World War II, but from a perspective of the U.S. and of the world. And Nuremberg, this exhibit was really from the perspective of the Germans, and it's something I never even had considered before. But when you think about what it is to be living in that environment, on the inside of it, and how certain anecdotes can seem appealing and understandable. One of the things that shook me to my core was reading these quotes. Reading these quotes that I say myself. About us being stronger as a community and stronger together. And these are anecdotes that were used maliciously and in a really frightening way to persecute other people at the same time, so it's a really, really bizarre thing. But I guess the point is that it gave me a lot of perspective on how simple it is, how easy it is to be complacent and naive. When from the outside, it's how in the world could you possibly be naive? In 20 years, who knows? There may be conversations of war crimes, within the U.S. borders, along the same lines. Who knows? Hopefully not. Again, hopefully not.
Well, I mean, those conversations have always been had, and there's people that could stand up and say that about Kissinger or Cheney, very easily. Yeah. But it's about, and to go back to your album, it's about the horizon. It's about steadying the wheel.
That's it.
And then trying to reconcile what has happened, what they have wrought, and how to move forward from that. And I guess in some ways Germany might be a model there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would imagine so. But it's a terrible part of our history as humans. That is not.
That we don't learn?
It's not as recent as 50 years or 70 years or 100 years. It's gone on for a very long time. But for whatever reason, maybe it's just because I'm here right now. on this planet. But my heart is compelled towards hope that there is an evolution taking place, and that if we are careful to not lose step with that change that's going on, that we might find ourselves in a place where these stories have a harder time being created.
That's always the concern, which is why art is often viewed as the lens in through difficult times. I remember the night that Trump was elected, there were several tweets on my feed that made me smile saying, well, there's going to be some good punk music coming out in the next 4 years.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've necessarily seen that, though.
Yeah. Here's my side. Here's my thing on the other side of that coin as well, though, is I can't choose to be as lazy as to say as to point the blame towards a specific person or a specific party. These are things that these are characteristics that are coming out in our identity as people. And that's where we need to make the changes. That's where we need to affect the change. Is this hopefully coming together and recognizing, again, what is fundamentally good and what is fundamentally bad, and what are we okay with as a society, as a people, and those things can't be flexible, and yeah, I mean, this record just helps to highlight those things, and
it shows you as an optimist as well. I think I listened to it and felt that the glass was half full.
Great. I'm really happy to hear that. Yeah, without question. Without question, I'm an optimist. I can't just leave the thing there to reflect what has been. I need to reflect what I hope to be. And that is that's the crux of it. Recognize the problems, identify them, so that we can correct them, and have our focus, our gaze fixed on the hope that is ahead of us.
That requires a level of maturity that doesn't usually come from nowhere.
Well, I'm not foreign to struggle, but yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess I don't know how to respond to that directly. There's been so many great voices throughout history that have been screaming these things for a long time. One of my favorite quotes is from Frederick Douglass, who says that without struggle there is no progress. So there's a certain degree of this struggle will make us better. Yeah.
What was the most profound piece of advice that someone's personally given you?
Profound piece of advice someone's given me. Man, that feels like it would take a lot of reflection. I mean, my most immediate response to that would be this applies to so many different areas in life, but simply that you haven't earned it. Whether it is the courtesy of a rock and roll crowd or world peace, the notion is that we have to keep on earning it on a daily basis. That there's not a moment where you can sit back and say, okay, I've arrived, it's here, I've earned it, and now, I don't have to work hard anymore. I'd say that's the first thing that would come to mind in that regard. And
who said it?
Those were words I got from that Bruce gave me early on in the tour in 2012. Before a show, pulled me aside and wanted to make sure it's clear to me that just because I was there, you haven't earned it, and you never earn it. And after 40 years of doing it at the time for him, he was still earning it on a nightly basis, and that we continue to earn it. And again, that applies to so much more than just a rock and roll stage. It applies to every aspect of your life, really. That the moment you start to feel entitled, you with certainty no longer are.
which is a mistake that we can all fall into. And
Sure.
It's and
Right. We all want to be comfortable and laid back, right?
yeah, but in order to have that Zen mentality, you've got to feel like you've done something. You can't just have your feet up from nothing.
Right. And continue to move the ball forward for as long as we have the capacity to do that. Right. I mean, because if you're not moving the ball forward, then there's a loss, right? Then now you've fallen into a loss, right? So yeah, we have to keep pushing.
It's I would hope that it feels like there's more positive than negative yardage, at least personally.
Yeah.
Maybe not when you read the New York Times, but
Yeah.
I don't mean the arts section. I mean the front section.
Yeah, I mean, nothing goes without hope, you know. Yeah, and there's every day that we all participate in recognizing the identity of us, the identity of we, is a day that that we can count a victory, you know. So like whatever the news may read, when we consider each other, you know. Empathy is a characteristic that has taken us at least hundreds of thousands of years to manifest. Yeah, it would be a travesty if obviously, to say the least, if we continue to lose sight of what that means in our species and identifying with each other as a whole.
I think I want to go back to where we started to finish up. What, other than rock and roll, for me, would bring us together the way that you felt your country come together after 9/11? And I'll say I feel that amongst 80,000 at Wembley Stadium a few years ago, watching you with the E Street Band. There was something joyful about that. But I guess you already have to have bought in to be there in the first place.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. To a certain degree, that's absolutely true. You know, 9/11 at the end of the day, I feel like isn't even necessarily a great example of that because it wasn't an impetus that was like going to last for a long time. It was
also led to the Patriot Act.
Yeah, well, let's not even get into that. But you know, the core of who we are and what we are and that unified togetherness. I think at the end of the day, it's just a matter of like really just considering each other, and we need to spend time together. I guess, you know, like what's going to do that? Yeah, I guess being that really weird person and knocking on your neighbor's door, you know, showing up with some cookies and just saying like, "Hey, I'm your neighbor, and we should know each other," you know. Yeah, I really don't want to beat that drum of you know, how social media has worked fervently against us in so many ways. But if we had more conversations together, you know, audible, visual, like where we were face to face, you know, I feel like it would manifest some of those genuine, beautiful characteristics that have been evolving over time, you know?
It's so important to find those moments, and especially, and I will jump on that social media, not bandwagon, but pile on, because it's, the more I see it, and yes, there are professional advantages, obviously, but the toxicity is extremely disheartening. So
yeah. You know, there's this notion of breaking bread and what it means to sit down and have a meal with somebody. And there's like nothing more communal than that. I don't think, you know, when you're sharing a meal together, when you're physically, you know, breaking bread with another person, you're discovering their culture, you know, their characteristics, and that's just a humbling thing to do. I did a living room tour a couple of years ago, where I toured. I went all over the world, and I was in people's homes, and it was such an amazing experience. These people were really generous. They all submitted applications. Those applications were chosen. They had to agree to let 45 to 70 strangers in their house. Those strangers would then purchase tickets online with no idea as to where the house was, just knowing what the city was.
Wow.
And 2 hours before the show, they were given an address, and they would show up. So you have this room full of like just people that are there for the common understanding that they wanted to enjoy an evening of music together, but like not necessarily any connection outside of that. And you're in the sanctuary of someone's home, you know. And it was so beautiful because everyone was so respectful because you're in that sanctuary. You're in that person's safe space. It is immediately a safe space for everyone, and just that community vibe, you know. Just to be inside of that, you know, your home, whether it's your home or someone else's home, you're in a home, and that just, I don't know, for me, creates such a beautiful aspect of community. We need to do more of that, you know.
Well, you can play my living room anytime, Jake.
Fair enough.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure, man. Thanks a lot, Dave.
The Kaufman Show is produced at CNS Studios in Montreal, Quebec by Alan Hodgson. I'm Dave Kaufman. Follow me on Twitter at The Kaufman Show.